Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters. I'm your host, Mitch. Glad to have you here. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about Commander on a budget. Today we have an episode of Commander's 2 Cents. On episodes like these, I give you my own personal take on topics about the format in general and current news. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And while you're at it, subscribe and review our podcast as well. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. So today's topic is going to be, what is the Power 9 of Commander? So for those of you that don't know, in Magic in general, there is what's known as the Power 9. This is essentially the list of the 9 most powerful cards in Magic's history. These 9 cards are so powerful and so broken that they're pretty much banned in most formats. In the Power 9, we've got Black Lotus, Mox Emerald, Mox Jet, Mox Pearl, Mox Ruby, Mox Sapphire, Time Walk, Ancestral Recall, and Time Twister. These cards are so powerful that actually 8 of them are banned in Commander. The only one that is not is Time Twister. Now, even though the actual Power 9 of Magic is agreed upon and really isn't up for debate, I highly doubt a Power 9 of Commander will ever be fully agreed upon by everyone. It's a very unique format that's played in a lot of different ways by a lot of different people, so there are a lot of opinions when it comes to what's powerful and what's not. So a quick disclaimer before we start, obviously the Power 9 that I'm choosing is 100% based off of my own opinion. A lot of factors went into picking each of these cards, and a lot of arguments can be made for other cards. If you come up with your own Power 9 that might look completely different than mine, and that's fine. Everyone's got their own perspective and reasons that they think certain cards are powerful in EDH. One note that I am going to make is that this list is not taking CDH into consideration. I personally don't play competitive EDH, and their list might be completely different than mine. Both Flash and Protean Hulk might show up there, but it's not going to be showing up here. Also, one final disclaimer, these are in no particular order. Just because I put something at number 1 or number 9 doesn't mean that number 1 is more powerful than 9 or the reverse. But there is still a number before each of these cards because I thought it looked good in the video, so just deal with it. With all that said, let's jump into it. So let's get started off with my first card in the Commander Power 9. And this card I think might be the most obvious choice out of all of them. And that card is Sol Ring. For those of you that don't know, Sol Ring is an artifact that costs 1 and it taps to add colorless. Sol Ring is essentially the poster child of the format, and for good reason. It is an extremely powerful and pretty much broken card that everyone accepts is able to be played in Commander. If this wasn't a multiplayer format, Sol Ring would probably be banned. A mana rock that only costs 1 and taps for 2 is an absolutely absurd and unheard of rate. I mean, there are plenty of great mana rocks out there that cost 2 and tap for 1. There are also plenty of mana rocks that I use that cost 3 or 4 that tap for 2. The amount of mana advantage that this gives you early in the game is absolutely incredible. Because this is a multiplayer format, players can adjust and target and team up against that player that got ahead. With as powerful as this card is, that's probably the only reason that it's not banned in this format. Now, I said that I'm not going to rank these and say which is the most powerful to Power 9, but I think if the community had to choose, they'd probably choose Sol Ring. And to be honest, it would probably be pretty tough to argue for anything else. If this card wasn't constantly being reprinted in pretty much every single Commander product, it would get really expensive. And although it's not cheap enough for me to include in most of my budget decks, plenty of players can afford this. So this piece of my Commander Power 9 is probably the most accessible out of all these cards. But now let's move on to a similar card that's not quite as accessible to most people in number 2. And not quite as accessible is probably an understatement since Mana Crypt is $180.72. It's an artifact that costs 0 and it says at the beginning of your upkeep, flip a coin. If you lose the flip, Mana Crypt deals 3 damage to you and you can tap it for colorless. So essentially this is a Sol Ring that costs 0 instead of 1, but it has a slight downside. Throughout the game, it's probably going to deal some damage to you, and that damage really depends on how you're flipping. Regardless, let me say this again, this is essentially a Sol Ring that costs 0. So just with this and a basic land into play on turn 1, you've got 3 mana. That's even more of a busted start than actually just starting with Sol Ring. In Commander, you start off at 40 life, so 3 damage every other turn or so isn't going to affect you too much. That damage is definitely going to be worth getting a mana rock that taps for 2 for absolutely no cost. Now, unlike Sol Ring, this one doesn't get printed anywhere near as often. And at nearly $200, this is definitely not an accessible card for most people. Still, this is an incredibly powerful card, and if you're looking to increase the power of your deck, this definitely is going to help. If you're looking to build the most powerful deck that you can, Sol Ring and Mana Crypt should probably be in it. In the Power 9, I'm sure there's an argument for this one being more powerful than Sol Ring, but again, we're not getting into that today, so make the decision for yourself. Anyways, it's time to move away from Mana Rocks and on to number 3. And at number 3, we're going to talk about our one and only land in this list with Gaia's Cradle. It's a legendary land that taps to add green for each creature that we control. It's also even more expensive than Mana Crypt at $323.55. This land is expensive for a reason. It's absolutely busted. The more creatures that you have in play, the more this taps for, and it's very easy in Commander to untap lands and retap them for mana. With not too much setup, this can put you way ahead of your opponents and give you a huge mana advantage. And again, because it's a land, it's not really taking up a slot in your deck. Obviously, this land isn't good for spellslinger decks, but if you're running green, you've probably got a decent amount of creatures in your deck. Again, there's a reason that it's so in demand and so expensive because it is a very powerful card. Unlike Tolarian Academy, which is a very similar land that taps that blue for each artifact you control, this one is legal. The reason for that probably being that artifacts are easier to abuse and get more into play quickly, but creatures are still not that difficult to get a lot into play. If you see one of your opponents putting this down, odds are they're playing a very tuned deck and you should probably look out for it. But now let's move on to a much more affordable card with number 4. Now, like the first 3 cards that I brought up, this one also deals with ramp, but I think this is going to be the most controversial one that I bring up. I'm already foreseeing a ton of comments that there's no way that this one should be in the Power 9. I did a lot of back and forth on either keeping this in or taking it out, but I eventually decided that it deserved to be here. So let me explain why when I talk about Smothering Tithe. It's an enchantment for 3 and a white, and it says whenever an opponent draws a card, that player may pay 2. If the player doesn't, you create a colorless treasure artifact token with tap, sacrifice this artifact, add 1 mana of any color. It's an $8.15 card, so it's really not cheap, but it is affordable for a lot of players. This card can provide an absurd amount of mana advantage throughout the game. 2 mana is a lot to pay for every single card draw, and most of the time, players are not going to be paying that. So that means that each time around the table, you're getting pretty much a guaranteed 3 treasures. And odds are, at least one player is going to draw some extra cards during that turn. And on top of that, this is pretty much busted with wheel effects. If you wheel and every single player draws 7, that's going to be 21 treasures coming your way. Now, obviously, that's the scenario where it can work best. But the amount of mana advantage that this can give you for just sitting on the field and you not doing anything else can be absolutely absurd. On its own, this card can put you way ahead of your opponents on mana, and it can be very hard for them to catch up. If they don't deal with it quickly, that mana advantage is going to take over and you're going to win. This is a recent card that came out last year and it's already seeing a ton of play. I think that just speaks to its power, and for that and many other reasons, I think it deserves a spot on this list. And again, I'm sure there's going to be plenty of people that disagree with me, and that's okay. But for the time being, let's move on to a similar card at number 5. And that somewhat similar card is going to be Ristic Study. Ristic Study is an enchantment for 2 and a blue, and it says whenever an opponent casts a spell, you may draw a card unless that player pays 1. So I imagine that Smothering Tithe's design was very much based off of this card. The amount of card advantage that this can generate for you throughout the game is absolutely absurd. The taxing effect is just 1 here instead of 2 like Smothering Tithe, but that's still usually enough for people not to pay it. So with just 1 trip around the table, you're probably going to be drawing 3 or even more cards with this. For an enchantment that just costs 3 mana, that kind of card advantage is absolutely absurd. There are times when your opponents are going to work together and pay for that cost, but you're still going to be taxing them. So even if they do pay for this tax, the amount of mana that you're denying them throughout the game is going to be huge. Now, Ristic Study is a fantastic card, and in my opinion, it definitely earned its spot in the Power 9. But there's another card advantage enchantment on this list that might be even more powerful. So now let's move on to number 6. And the 6th card of my Commander Power 9 is Necropotence. Necropotence is an enchantment that costs black, 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 and it says skip your draw step. Whenever you discard a card, exile that card from your graveyard. And then pay 1 life, exile the top card of your library face down, put that card into your hand at the beginning of the next end step. So there are 2 very small downsides to this card. Skipping your draw step isn't great, and whenever you discard a card, having to exile it isn't great either. But the ability on this card more than makes up for that, and it's absolutely broken. Essentially, being able to exchange life for cards whenever you want is pretty absurd. Now, you won't get that card into your hand until the end step, so you can't get it right away, but still. Essentially, for 3 mana, you've got access to pretty much all the cards that you'll ever need. Again, Commander is a format where you start off with a ton of life. And this card helps you fully utilize that resource and turn it into card advantage. It's going to be really hard for your opponents to catch up with the amount of card advantage that you can generate pretty much immediately with this card. With the power level of this card, I think it more than deserves to be in this list of the Power 9 of Commander. But now let's move on to another powerful black card with number 7. And that card is, of course, Demonic Tutor. Demonic Tutor is a sorcery for 1 in the black, and it says search your library for a card, put that card into your hand, then shuffle your library. So whatever situation you're in, this card is pretty much the best card in your deck for just an extra 2 mana. Need a board wipe or a finisher or a combo piece, this can get you the exact one that you want for, again, 2 mana. Typically, for a tutor that can get anything directly into your hand, you're going to pay twice as much. Now, one word that I'm sure is going to come up when it comes to the Power 9 conversation is going to be auto-includes. Essentially, a card that always should go in your deck no matter what. And I'm sure I'm going to get some comments on this too, but I think when it comes to auto-includes, Demonic Tutor is above all the rest, including Sol Ring. Again, Demonic Tutor is essentially the best card that you need in the situation that you're in, but just for an extra 2 mana. Outside of price considerations, I think it's pretty much impossible for anyone to argue that this shouldn't be included in every single black deck. Now, obviously, some people don't like tutors in Commander, but outside of that, again, it's just so powerful that there's no reason it shouldn't be in there. There are similar tutors that I'm sure other people are going to bring up, like Vampiric, but Demonic Tutor is just better in my opinion. It gets any card directly into your hand for just 1 in a black, and that's absolutely absurd. But now it's time for us to move on to number 8. And I'm sure everyone's been expecting me to mention this one in particular for a while, so here we go. So next up, we've got Wayfarer's Just kidding, it's Cyclonic Rift. For those of you that don't know, Cyclonic Rift is an instant that costs 1 and a blue, and it says return target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand. It also has Overload for 6 and a blue, so instead of just bouncing 1 non-land permanent, it bounces all of your opponent's non-land permanents. This card is a flexible, one-sided board wipe at instant speed for just 7 mana. It can set you up for a win, or just set all of your opponents way back. There have been plenty of people who have wanted this card banned for quite a while now, and for good reason. It's an extremely powerful one-sided card, and I think it easily makes the power 9. Now, some of you might have seen the episode where I talked about how I don't believe that Cyclonic Rift actually belongs in every single deck that it can be put in. It's definitely an auto-include for most decks, but not all like Demonic Tutor is. Does it belong in 99.999% of decks? Sure. But you're never going to convince me that it belongs in Golos, so have fun commenting on that. Was that a little salty? Yes, it was. But let's potentially open up a whole new bag of salt with my last pick. So now it's time to go on to number 9. And the last spot of my Commander Power 9 is taken with Teferi's Protection. It's an instant that costs 2 and a white, and it says until your next turn, your life total can't change, and you have protection from everything. All permanents you control phase out. So while they're phased out, they're treated as though they don't exist. They phase in before you're untapped during your untapped step. Exile Teferi's Protection. This card is absolutely incredible to say the least. You're basically just saying, hey, I'm out of here for a bit, and I'll be right back when it's more convenient for me. This can save you from pretty much everything from a detrimental board wipe to losing the game. Someone overloads a Cyclonic Rift, sure, they can affect your other opponents, but not you. The amount of situations that this can save you from are countless. It's a versatile card that pretty much completely protects you at a very low cost of 3 mana. It came out back in 2017, so like Smothering Tithe, it's a decently new card, at least in comparison to the other cards in this Power 9 list. But again, like Smothering Tithe, I think it's already earned its spot in the Commander Power 9. Now, of course, outside of these 9 cards, there are plenty of honorable mentions that I was considering but didn't quite make the cut. Cards like Wayfarer's Bauble, Time Twister, and Mana Vault were of course in consideration, but for one reason or another, they didn't quite make my cut. Again, keep in mind that this list is completely subjective. Your list is probably going to be different than mine, and that's okay. But with that, this show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your Commander Power 9 would be. And make sure you're following us on social media for more updates and sneak peeks on future episodes. Again, a huge thank you to my patrons who help make this show possible. I truly couldn't do any of this without your support. If you want to support this channel directly, consider becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, including being able to vote on future commanders for deck techs. There are even tiers where you get your own personalized deck tech dedicated to you. You can check out all the Patreon tiers and rewards at patreon.com/commandersquarters. If you haven't already, make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about budget Commander. So while you're at it, go ahead and check out some of our other types of episodes. And with that, I'm out of here. Thanks again, and have a good one.